Good morning, ladies and gentlemen in the media. Welcome to our post-cabinet brief, Thursday, November 10th, 2016. The brief this morning will be given by the Honorable Minister of State, Joseph Harmon. Also joining us today is Honorable Amna Ali, Minister of Social Cohesion. Mr. Harmon will now give the brief.
Thank you, Mr. Archer. Ladies and gentlemen of the media, welcome to the post-cabinet press briefing. This brief covers matters which were addressed at Cabinet on Tuesday, 8th of November, 2016. I know that day that many persons were having their fingers crossed, all sorts of things about the US elections. But we had the business of the nation to deal with, and so we focused on cabinet matters. On the said day, the Honorable Minister of Education presented a report to the Cabinet on the emergency education intervention for improved performance in mathematics by students in the grade 6 to Cabinet. You'll recall that at one of my previous press conferences, I did indicate that the Cabinet had asked the Ministry of Education to address this matter specifically and for them to present Cabinet with an immediate, a midterm and a long-term proposal. That proposal was in fact submitted to Cabinet, and Cabinet considered the proposals made by the Minister of Education. It involved what is known as a 7-point strategy, which includes some of the following items. 1, training of teachers in content and methodology. 2, facilitating fortnightly cluster meetings in all regions. 3, the recruitment of mathematics coordinators and monitors. 4, the training of officers and school administrators to supervise the teaching of mathematics. The preparing and administering a diagnostic assessment of pupils in the hinterland regions before training. 6thly, the enhancement of public relations, parental involvement in the education of the children, and 7thly, the acquisition of support material for its students. Cabinet was informed that preparatory work had already started, and in this regard, the proposed strategies that the full implementation will bring about will commence upon Cabinet's approval of and the release of funds. Having had a very thorough discussion on the matter, Cabinet approved the proposed plan and agreed to the allocation of a sum of $48,682,690 for the expenditure on the strategy that will deal with the issues before and up to the end of December 2016, and the allocation of a further sum to be spent on the strategy in 2017 and going forward. So there is an immediate emergency arrangement which requires this sum of $48 million, and there's a strategy that's outlined for that, which has already started, and we agree to that. Secondly, the Honorable Minister of Natural Resources informed Cabinet of the Barama Companies Limited decision not to renew its timber sales agreement for approximately 1,600,000 hectares of timber forests that expired on October 15th, 2016. In this regard, the Honorable Minister presented a number of options for alternative use of the land, as well as to address the welfare of the workers of the company that have been affected by the decision of the said company not to renew the timber sales agreement. After some careful deliberation, Cabinet agreed to the appointment of a subcommittee of Cabinet itself comprising the Ministers of Natural Resources, Communities, Business, Indigenous Peoples Affairs, and Social Protection to consider the options presented by the Minister of Natural Resources and make recommendations to Cabinet as to the feasibility and possible implementation of these options. The subcommittee was required to submit its recommendation to Cabinet by November 30th, 2016. The Honorable Minister of Natural Resources also presented a paper requesting Cabinet's approval for the establishment of a corps of wardens to support compliance and enforcement policies and programs within the ministry, within the natural resources sector. The Honorable Minister of Natural Resources reminded Cabinet that his ministry had responsibility for governance of the extractive industry sector, and that as those industries expanded over the years, a number of illegal activities and non-compliance issues with the law and regulations had become entrenched. This had resulted in the near collapse in some cases and in some areas of the rule of law within the sector, and threatened Guyana becoming non-compliant with a number of environmental agreements and protocols. The need for a robust compliance and enforcement program across the extractive industries sector was therefore necessary and urgent. The issues to be addressed by the wardens include, but are not limited to, non-compliance with mining-related environmental regulations, to provide institutional capacity to enable enforcement of the various regulatory frameworks, to coordinate action against illegal mining, drug trafficking, deforestation, and trafficking in persons, to monitor increased turbidity levels within rivers, creeks, and streams, and the damage to river channels and groundwater sources, as well as to monitor improper chemical waste management. The Corps of Wardens will also be expected to be an emergency rescue and disaster recovery unit within the natural resources sector. Cabinet approved of the establishment of the Corps of Wardens and noted that the agencies that will benefit from its activity included the Guyana Geology and Mines Commission, the Guyana Forestry Commission, the Guyana Gold Board, the Environmental Protection Agency, the Protected Areas Commission, the Guyana Wildlife Management Authority, and the Guyana Lands and Surveys Commission. Cabinet approved the appointment of His Excellency Mr. Didier Chassot as a non-resident ambassador of Switzerland to Guyana. Ambassador Chassot is resident in Caracas, Venezuela. Guyana and Switzerland, as we recall, established diplomatic relations in May of 1977. And in 2015, the government of Guyana accepted an offer from the government of Switzerland to establish a diplomatic mission in Geneva. It is envisaged that the appointment of His Excellency Ambassador Chassot will further enhance diplomatic ties between Guyana and Switzerland and provide opportunities to develop our trade and economic relations. Cabinet also discussed matters relating to the National Assembly that were in the media, and asked the Honorable Minister of Social Cohesion, Minister Amna Ali, to make a brief presentation on this matter and to take questions. So I'll now invite Minister Ali to speak to the issues, after which we will take questions from you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Harmon. Ladies and gentlemen of the media, as you know, the government has been making accusations, the opposition has been making accusations that the government hijacked Members' Day. And so this morning, I would like to put this whole issue into some perspective and to allude to the points reference hijacking of the parliament. First of all, I would like to say that the business of parliament is guided by the standing orders. And standing orders 24(2) has made reference to sittings of the National Assembly when we can have them and when the opposition is entitled to have precedence in these sittings. I also want to refer to Articles 55 of the Constitution and Sections 71 and 72, and also Articles 61 and 69. And these articles elucidate when and how these sittings of the National Assembly must take place. The first sitting of the 11th Parliament was held on the 10th of June 2015. Every fourth sitting of the Parliament, except at budget time, is what we call Members' Day or the Opposition Day. November 4th, which was the last parliamentary sitting, November 4th was the day of government business and not opposition business, as was being alluded to. The next Members' Day is the 48th sitting, which is the next 2 or 3 sittings. Now, during budget time, those days, those sitting days are not counted. And when we looked at the whole scenario, it was discovered that the next Members' Day will be until next year, sometime in January. And so, at the behest of the Speaker, the opposition chief whip and I had discussions with him, and we conceded to have the next parliamentary sitting, which is November 21st, to be given to the opposition to debate opposition matters. I want to say that no less a person than the opposition chief whip is au fait with the standing orders and with the Constitution. So I don't think it is a matter of misconception, but I believe that it is a deliberate attempt. And so this must be corrected now, regardless of how painful it may seem. We have to work with what the Constitution says and what the standing orders say, lest we fall into chaos. And so I trust that I have cleared the air of when is Members' Day or Opposition Day and when is Government Business Day. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister Ali, for that very clear, precise elucidation of the Constitution, the law, and the standing orders of our National Assembly. I will now take questions from you on the briefing that was done.
Are we recruiting additional resources has there been a move to get new resources to promote this program in the short term, sir? And where are we getting the additional resources from, sir, if any?
Thank you. It's a very good question. The NSERD, that basically is the entity within the Ministry of Education that deals with these matters, they've actually looked at the entire situation across the country, and several measures have been proposed. One, of course, is to rehire teachers who had been in the system and had left because of the age or several other issues. They looked at that and to rehire those. They're looking at the enlargement of the pool of persons who can actually teach mathematics. And my understanding is that they're well advanced in getting to that stage. Additionally, they propose holding several conferences for all of the mathematics teachers across the country. They're going to bring them to Georgetown, or in some cases will go to those regions with the expertise, and to have them prepared for this. This has already started, my understanding is, at the Ministry of Education. And so the combination of the retired teachers, the specific training which is going to be given to the mathematics teachers in the system, and also based on the assessment which the ministry makes for them to employ additional persons in that regard. As I said, Cabinet has approved of the monies required for the resources for that program to take place, and my understanding is that it has already started. Yes.
Is there an option to recruit people from overseas if necessary, sir?
Well, all of those options will be explored because, as you know, over the years, many of our good teachers have actually left, migrated to the Caribbean, as far as Botswana in some cases. And certainly, once we provide the correct environment, and many of them have actually started coming back, we believe that we can attract some of those teachers who had left in the first case with the kind of environment that is being produced or prepared now in the education system, as well as the resources that the government is putting into education. So we believe that that is a very, very clear and viable option, which will be exercised by the ministry.
Yes, Minister Harmon.
Could you use the mic, please?
Yes, Minister Harmon. You were speaking to us about solutions in relation to the mathematics issue, but we're still operating with a little bit of a blind spot. What exactly was the pass rate at this year's grade 6 examination for math? And what is that, has that data been disaggregated so we can know where the particular trouble spots are?
Well, yes. I thought that information was already in the public because it is not, the examination results is not a secret because they are provided by the Ministry of Education. In fact, it is, I'm sure you'll find it on the website as well.
It's not there.
Okay, but, well, if that is not there, maybe I'd ask the ministry to ensure that that happens. But what I can say to you is that from the analysis which we have done, this is what has led to us basically dealing with these matters. Because we believe that the results were not as good as we would expect them to be. The initial report indicating that this was a trend which had started even before we came into office, but we're not making a big meal out of that. We have to correct what we find, and we're working to correct it. The hinterland areas were most severely affected, and this is why we have a special program for the hinterland areas insofar as the results are concerned. The hinterland communities were more affected than the communities on the coastland.
Just one final thing. Are you going to commit the Ministry of Education to releasing this data to us? Because we do not have this data. Are you going to?
Well, if you don't have it, then in fact, yes. That's not something that is difficult. Because it is public information, public knowledge. What I think you are probably looking for is the analysis of that. But the public data, the data, you can get that, I'm sure. Yes.
Minister Gilari Kaiser News, I see you mentioned the wardens for the Ministry of Natural Resources. Within the forestry, there are forestry officers and GGMC, there are mines officers. How is the warden situation going to work? Because each has its own enforcement arms.
Yes, this is why the wardens will basically be one unit. They will receive a certain level of police training, which is across the board, and therefore they will all have the necessary police training and the relevant policing powers that those entities would have. That apart, depending on the speciality, depending on what it is that you're asked to comply and to enforce, there'll be specialized training for these wardens in those areas. So, for example, the GGMC, the Corps of Wardens will have specific training in matters relating to gold, matters relating to the use of chemicals in the hinterland and things of that nature. The wardens that actually have to deal with forestry, they will have specialized training in that area. But what is, of course, what is of interest is that all of them will have a certain level of training across the board, and so that they can act. If, for example, a forestry warden is in an area where something is taking place, because there would have been a standardized training for them across the board, then he will be able to act as well.
What I was really trying to get, Minister, is whether we are going to see a phasing out of the actual mines officers in terms of enforcement and
No,
the GFC officers.
The mines officers are mines officers. They are part of the Guyana Geology and Mines Commission. What we are talking about is a special corps of persons whose responsibility will be for the compliance and issues in that regard. So in fact, what they will be a sort of support to what is already there. But because, as I explained in the initial statement, that the expansion in the extractive sector, the focus that is being placed on these hinterland operations will require a different type of policing. Will require a type of policing which is in addition to what we have now. Many of you know about the certain levels of recklessness that takes place there, some amount of lawlessness that takes place in the hinterland, and we have to correct these things. Trafficking in persons is also a very major matter, which I think was Minister of Social Protection addressed that as well. And so all of these issues are issues which will be dealt with by these Corps of Wardens after they had been properly trained and equipped and then deployed.
Can you say how soon these wardens will be dispatched, and what is the process of hiring the wardens?
Well, there are some persons who are already performing these functions in the various sectors. They'll be actually brought together for the training that I've said to you, the across-the-board training. Additionally, we will have to have other persons who are going to be trained. And clearly, there will be advertisements and so on, as we normally do when you're requiring people to perform any functions in that regard. There'll be advertisement, there'll be interviews, and based on that, the persons will be selected for training before they're deployed. So you'll have two levels. You'll have the fresh persons who are now coming in, and you'll have those persons who are already in, who will be brought together for upgrading training, as well as the persons who are now coming in for the standard training and then to be deployed.
So the hiring will be done by the Natural Resources Ministry?
Yes.
Okay, and on the Barama issue, you said you were looking at alternative for the use of the lands?
Yes.
Could you say what are some of these alternatives?
Well, as I said, there are options now, but what I can say to you that they are, in a broad sense, because it's quite a large amount of land, 1.6 million hectares. And therefore, we are looking at medium scale. We're looking at small scale work in the community, in that area. The small scale work, we are exploring the possibility of even those employees who were in the sector forming themselves into into cooperatives and so on to be able to use work in those areas. So there are several options which we are exploring. As Minister Trotman would have advised, that there are already expressions of interest from several foreign companies as well as local companies, but we first have to look at our own employees, our own Guyanese people in that regard.
Gordon Mosley, News Source. Minister Harmon, with regards to the emergency plan to deal with mathematics, we're having the same math problem at both the primary and secondary level. One is preparing you for high school, the other one for life. Could you say why the Education Ministry sought to go after the primary problem first?
Well, it is as you know, if you have a problem in primary, by the time you get to the secondary, the problem goes with you. So we figured that at the bottom level, this is where it has to be dealt with initially. Because if you don't deal with it there, they will get to the secondary level, then they will get to the university, and the problem was never dealt with. And that is the reason why it was important that we deal with it at the primary level. It is not as if we are saying we are excluding at the secondary level, but we consider what is happening at the primary level to be of extreme importance now. And the long-term plan of the ministry will include looking at the performance at the secondary level. I say this to you too, I believe some of the reports I get out of our own university will indicate that we have a problem at the tertiary level as well. But if you don't correct it at the primary level, it will go with you into the secondary and into the tertiary levels. That is why we've dealt with it that way.
And sir, with regards to the 7-point strategy, I have not seen any of them looking at a review of the curriculum because we're teaching a math syllabus that would have been around for well over 2 decades or so. So they're looking to change it, update it, upgrade it, and bring it up to date with today's technology and everything else.
Yes, I believe you were out for 2 of my previous press conferences when I did in fact announce that government had awarded a contract for a consultation to consultants to look at the curriculum in the schools. That contract has been awarded already, and the consultants, I believe, should be here anytime this month to start the work.
Good morning. Just 2 quick questions. From Minister Ali, could you say from June 2015 to now what social cohesive measures you've actually taken to the National Assembly and what were the results? And for Minister Harmon, could you say where government is with regard to the framework for capping the concessions in the natural resources sector?
Well, let me deal with that about capping the concessions. I'm not too clear as to the precise details of that. Certainly, Minister Trotman, the Minister of Natural Resources, will be able to address that issue. And so it has not been brought to Cabinet as a specific paper as such, so that they can be clearer Cabinet decisions and Cabinet dealing with the issue. So for that is concerned, I would respectfully refer you to Minister Trotman, who is the Minister of Natural Resources, and I'm sure very, very capable of dealing with the answers to that question.
Just a follow-up.
Yes.
Just a quick follow-up on that. Could you say if the matter has been discussed, whether recently or not, has it been made priority for government to insist on the need to capping the concessions, given what has taken place in the past?
Well, insofar as making matters a priority for the government, I think our ministers who are responsible for these sectors are quite capable of bringing these matters up. I cannot say to you now that it has been, Cabinet has been requested or required to make a decision on a matter of capping, not making capping a priority. But I can say to you that the Ministry of Natural Resources, that they have the capacity, they have the intellectual and the other capacities within the ministry to be able to deal with the issue and to bring a paper to Cabinet for a decision once a decision has to be made.
So, okay. Now, with regards to social cohesion measures being taken to Parliament, as you would agree with me that social cohesion is a new ministry and it has only come into being from 2015. What we are doing in social cohesion now is a lot of sensitization in the regions, get people to have a buy-in to what social cohesion is and so on. And so we have been doing a lot of consultations to come up with a 5-year strategic plan, and we have been doing a lot of sensitization. In terms of taking measures to Parliament on social cohesion, we have not done that yet. What we have been doing in Parliament is elaborating, elucidating programs of social cohesion and so on. But as time goes by, we will see this unfolding.
Morning, Minister. Royden from Nightly News. I just have one question.
Yes.
Minister Harmon, last week you would have said, I think Gaisuku is indebted to the sum of $88 billion. The two sugar unions, namely GAU and NASI, are still trying to understand how the corporation is so indebted after in 2014 Gaisuku presented to the Parliamentary Economic Services Committee that it was indebted to the sum of $58 billion. How come the corporation is so indebted when there were so much inflows from the government to the corporation over that period of time?
Well, last week I gave to you what were the proposals that came to Cabinet. And the proposal said that if we were to remain, if we were to keep the status quo, that these are the sums that you will require. So that sum will be required for 2017, and then I gave you the 2018 figures and going ahead. So the questions that are asked by the sugar unions, I'm sure that the Ministry of Agriculture, I'm sure that Gaisuku is in a position to present that information to them, just as they presented it to Cabinet. These are matters which have been thoroughly investigated by the Commission of Inquiry into Sugar, by special teams that have been created by Gaisuku and the Ministry of Agriculture to look at specific issues in relation to the Gaisuku plan, which I elaborated on last week. So the sugar unions they are part of the stakeholders in this matter. And we welcome any input from the unions in dealing with these issues. And so if the union has actually made a statement, they require information, then clearly this information, once it is not privileged, once it is not information which is in a sense indicative, then they can provide that the Ministry of Agriculture can provide that information, or Gaisuku. But it is better for them to call us and talk to us rather than us having to read about it in the media. We have said here last week when I related what the 5-point strategy was, that part of it includes the consultation with stakeholders. We consider the unions to be a very, very important stakeholder in this industry, and we will never leave them out of the consideration about the future of sugar in this country.
Travis Chase, Nightly News. Minister Harmon, was the apparent rift between Commissioner Silal Prasad and Mr. David Ramnarayan discussed at Cabinet? If so, what were the recommendations?
Well, yes, it was discussed at Cabinet. The apparent rift which has actually found its way into the public space, into the media. Large organizations like that, you would always have issues affecting personnel, because once you have 2 persons in a room or 3, you will always have a difference. Sometimes you and your wife alone in the house, you all still have differences. So you have these things, but the important thing is that because of the importance of the Guyana Police Force to the national security structure, it is important that these matters that occur in the public space, in the media, that they be dealt with in another way. So the matter was brought to Cabinet, and the Minister of Public Security was tasked with addressing it. It was tasked with addressing it. The issues that were raised there that came into the public space, we believe are issues which could have been dealt with internally without this question of writing letter here and there. I believe that the relationship which must exist at that level will require, if a subordinate has done something that requires some amount of reprimand or some amount of proper assigning, that those things can be done internally. In fact, the president says he prefers that you have public praise and private reprimand. So that if something is done like that, you have reprimand to take place, the person is brought in, called in, say, man, what is it that you're doing here? Let us try and correct it. And the Minister of Public Security has been asked to look at the situation and to deal with the matters. It's within his remit to handle that.
Do you know if the matter has been referred to the AG chambers?
Well, I don't know what it is to be addressed, to be referred to the AG chambers, whether there is an action, a civil action that has been brought against the state by any person. That's the AG's. The AG's job is that. But the matter is properly under the remit of the Minister of Public Security. And he is the member of cabinet. He is the person who has responsibility for that sector.
Look, Adam Gino, how does government plan to address the Prado 2 investigation, given that the DPP, who will have to advise on possible charges or the way forward, might most likely be a respondent since she has a house there?
Well, I did in fact point out last week the way in which government will address the Prado 2 issue. I did indicate what the government planned on doing, and there is no difference from last week to this week. We will stay the course.
Shanza Samuels, NCN. As it relates to the Nizam Hassan issue, will we see a similar case as it relates to Carvel Duncan? It being dealt with in a similar way as it relates to Carvel Duncan, the Carvel Duncan issue?
Well, they're two distinct matters. I don't know what is the connection that you're making. Both of them have been charged and are appearing before the magistrate's court. My understanding is that there was some issue in relation to the prosecuting of one of the offenses in the Carvel Duncan case, and I further understand that the DPP has appealed it. In relation to the Hassan's case, then they will look at what levels of prosecution is required and ensure that the proper prosecution team is put together, whether it be from the DPP's office or wherever. We will have a very strong prosecution team on all of these matters that have to do with state assets.
Mr. Harmon, sir, with regard to police matters and so, could you say now if the government has in fact indicated to the DPP that it prefers when these matters pop up with state assets, police prosecutors are not the ones dealing with the matters, you have more senior attorneys? And sir, could you say too whether there are foreign investigators, law investigators working along with the police force dealing with different matters? I have seen at least on 2 occasions a foreigner working along supervising police investigations here.
All right, well, 2 things. That the police force, they have several agreements with other law enforcement entities. And from time to time, And these persons come together. Some of our people go abroad. But the president did state, and I believe Minister Ramjitan also stated, that we are expecting assistance from the British under the security sector reform program, which had been suspended under the previous administration, and that we've actually, if you actually see persons there, they may be advanced team as part of that overall looking at the security sector reform, in particular, the way we do policing. And this is one of the positives of how we are addressing crime in this country in a very systematic way. We have to look at how the sector is dealt with. We have to look at best practices. And from time to time, we will get assistance from friendly countries in assisting us in these matters. So that if, in fact, you did, in fact, see persons, that would have been the framework within which that operates.
And the first question, sir.
The first question about the DPP, whether there's been any discussion with the DPP. I believe from time to time the DPP would have conversations with the Attorney General and with the Minister of Public Security on matters, because you would recognize that the prosecution of certain matters are done by policemen and up to certain levels, and those police ranks are under the Ministry of Public Security. There are certain matters which are dealt with directly from the Office of the Director of Public Prosecution, where she will send her officers to do that. But there's always a close collaboration between the police and the DPP. And so, of necessity, there will always have to be collaboration between the ministers responsible for the police and the DPP. We recognize the DPP as an independent office, and therefore we will not instruct the DPP on anything that she has to do. But clearly, once these matters appear in the public domain, once these are matters that have to do with the assets of the state and high-profile cases, I'm sure that when the advice goes to the DPP, the files go to the DPP, that she probably will be requested to ensure that the prosecution team is very strong.
Minister Gildary, a quick follow-up to NCN's question. What is the thinking of the administration as far as persons who are charged before the court and the whole public officers? Are they supposed to go on leave? Are they supposed to be sent on administrative leave? And secondly, I think we are about to start looking for a new ombudsman. There was a specific case, the first case that was made by the ombudsman, the Maurice Arjun case. The people has put that case before the Parliament, the National Assembly, to be debated, and it's months now. It's almost 2 years after, and we see nothing, and they've been complaining. Is this an ideal situation, that something that the government likes, or is something that they would frown on?
Well, the office of the Ombudsman is an important office, and as you know, the previous holder died recently. And so it is something which we have to very carefully consider, the persons who are appointed into that office. So I can say to you that we are in fact looking at several persons, which once we have basically decided on what are the names of the persons we're likely to put up, we'll have to discuss that with the leader of the opposition and to get his buy-in on it. That is what the law requires. So I can let you know that we are looking at the matter, we're looking at the appointment of an ombudsman, but it's something which requires careful consideration. The report of the ombudsman and the laying of the matter in the National Assembly by the opposition, I can't specifically say what is the status of that, but if in fact they did lay it as a motion, and required it to be debated, they could have actually brought it back on the Members' Day, as Minister Ali spoke to you about just now, and give it some amount of priority. So if it's an opposition motion, then it is basically their determination as to what pace or what speed they give to it being debated in the National Assembly. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.